I'm Scott Crockett, host of The Brief, a podcast by the Business Council of Alberta. In this special episode, you'll hear from the newly formed Western Business Coalition. It's a powerful alliance featuring top economic leaders representing business in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. The coalition is calling for federal policies that realize the value of Canada's resource sectors. Their recent report, Untapped Potential, outlines actionable policy recommendations in 5 key industries: energy, agriculture, mining and critical minerals, forestry, and aquaculture. From repealing harmful legislation to building smarter infrastructure, the report is a clear call to prioritize prosperity and performance. Enjoy the panel as this week's special guests make the case for a modern resource economy that works and wins for all Canadians. Well, welcome back to the Alberta Better podcast. And have we ever got a good one today with the Western Business Coalition? I think this is a bit of a rare opportunity where we have so much of Western Canada's business advocacy in one interview, in one digital room here. So I'd like to quickly go around the panel and ask each of you a quick background on yourself and how you found yourself at the helm of your province's top business organization. And for this one, let's go west to east. So Laura Jones.
Laura Jones. I'm the president and CEO of the Business Council of British Columbia. So for me, it really started, I think, as my career started to unfold and I understood what I was passionate about. And that my passion really was around the importance of a strong economy. And the importance of a strong economy, not just for the sake of having a strong economy, but because a strong economy matters to our communities. Without a strong economy, it's very hard to have thriving communities. It's hard for our kids to see a future for themselves in our communities. It becomes harder to help those who are less fortunate. So a strong economy is really, really foundational to our prosperity. And so that's kind of what led me to say yes when the job came around. And prior to that, I taught economics for a little while at BCIT. I was involved in some think tank work. I spent a large amount of time working for the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, which was a fantastic job for seeing all of Canada. You know, it certainly wasn't the job I dreamed about when I was 8 years old, but I would say it is a dream job and a really important job right now because our economy, when we look nationally, we've been flatlining and we absolutely need to come together around policies that are going to help us strengthen our economy.
Hear, hear. Adam, your voice is a little more familiar for certain to listeners of this podcast, but it's not often we ask you for a snapshot of your background. So give us the quick one.
Thanks, Scott. And like Laura, I didn't necessarily set out to lead a business council, but my name's Adam Legge. I'm the president of the Business Council of Alberta, and I've really just meandered my career through economic development and public policy and business advocacy through starting at PricewaterhouseCoopers in some economic development advisory work, then working with Calgary Economic Development in its very early iterations in the research and economic side, and then led the Calgary Chamber of Commerce for 7 years, and then was fortunate enough to meet the 5 founders of the Business Council of Alberta through my work at the Chamber, and when they began thinking about creating this entity in 2018, they asked me to build the plan and then take over as president of the organization. So much like Laura, I believe I do this work because I want to leave it better than I found it, for particularly to my kids and all the kids of Alberta and Canada, so that we can have a strong country where everybody has a good life. And I think the path through that is through a thriving private sector, job creation, investment, and prosperity. So just having a heck of a lot of fun doing it.
Prabha, how about you? Did you dream of being head of the Saskatchewan Chamber of Commerce when you were a child?
Just like Laura and Adam, I had absolutely no idea I was going to land here. I've had a very diverse career. I actually led an accounting organization, and I was on the provincial merger committee, and I was one of 8 people responsible for unifying the accounting profession and creating CPA Saskatchewan. And once that was done, I was asked to take on the role of the CEO of Women Entrepreneurs of Saskatchewan. And during my time, we shifted the narrative to focus more on the economic contributions of women entrepreneurs in Saskatchewan. And so I did that for about 7 years, and this opportunity came up, and it seemed like a natural progression where I felt like I could make a bigger impact on the business community. I took this role recognizing there was a shift in geopolitics and Russia had invaded Ukraine, and that really changed the world. And it changed a lot for Saskatchewan. And literally, we can say Saskatchewan has what the world needs right now: food, fuel, and fertilizer. And I believe that this was an incredibly important role to advance economic priorities in the province.
And Bram from Manitoba.
Yeah, Bram Strain, President and CEO, Business Council of Manitoba. And unlike everyone else, I actually did want this job at one point.
There you go.
Yeah. I've spent 23 and a half years with the federal government and ended up as Assistant Deputy Minister for what was Western Economic Diversification at the time. I spent a couple years as DM at the province in education and infrastructure, and it was there where I first got exposed to the Business Council and its membership. And I thought to myself, geez, that's a pretty good gig. You get to hang out with the really smart people, and you just tell other people what to do. So I thought that's pretty good. So I did want that job at that point in time. And then I went to the city of Lethbridge in Alberta for a couple years. And when this opportunity came to come back home and make a difference with an organization with a membership that truly care about our communities, our province, and our country, and who make a difference. When that opportunity came, I took it. And what a better time to be here than through COVID and now, of course, with our trade situation. So happy to be here.
Well, speaking of the time that we're in right now, the four of you have done something quite unique and come together and formed the Western Business Coalition. So, Adam, I'll start with you. What inspired the formation of the Western Business Coalition? What's the purpose? What's the goal?
Well, we had a variety of different sort of permutations of us have been talking over the years. Bram and Laura's predecessor and I would meet with Goldie at the Business Council of Canada and our friends over at the Business Council of New Brunswick, and just kind of share information. And then when Laura joined BCBC, we had a chat about how do we really harness the power of the West, because the West is best, and we wanted to do something significant, and so chatted with Bram and Prava to really create that really strong four-province organization that can identify issues, identify commonalities, and frankly develop a united set of ideas, recommendations, and solutions, and advocate jointly on those things, because the power of the West is significant. The similarities, as we've seen through this Untapped Potential project that we've just completed through natural resources, we all have very tight and deep connections to the natural resource sector across all four provinces. There are different combinations of what is strong and available in each province, but they're still significant. And I think the ability to do things jointly lends greater heft and significance to the voice, particularly as we're trying to influence the federal government. And we have commonalities across our provincial governments in terms of some of the ambitions and the opportunities, and how do we streamline things and work closer together. We're all provincial partners in the New West Partnership. And so how do we leverage that? How do we connect? We're all very closely aligned with our provincial governments and engage with our provincial governments and can work effectively jointly through that. So our purpose really is to continue to have Western Canada build on its strengths and assets and contributions and capabilities to enable greater prosperity in all of Canada. And we want to be able to do that and have our provinces play to our strengths, as opposed to be frankly constrained in some ways that we are right now. And we feel that doing that jointly and collectively is more powerful than individually.
So speaking of that advocacy, particularly to the federal government, Laura, I think most of our listeners would be familiar with terms like Western alienation. Do you think there's a deficit in Ottawa when it comes to representation of Western Canadian priorities, or an appreciation for the contributions of Western Canada? And if so, what's the coalition going to do about it?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, before the call, we were talking about how I'm taking media calls today on Alberta's feeling frustrated around resources and the policies and where Ottawa policies are with respect to supporting resources. And I think it's a really, really important national conversation that we need to have, because we all talked about in our introductions the importance of a strong economy to the prosperity of our communities. But policy plays a really important role when it comes to a strong economy. We need policies that support that, not policies that kind of chase away capital. And sometimes it's not doing it in an intentional way. But for example, when you look at regulatory timelines and how complicated and cumbersome things have become over time, that basically we're chasing away capital, we're chasing away big projects from our country. And when we are doing that, essentially we're chasing away prosperity. And we need to change the channel on that. And natural resources is a huge advantage for the country. 70% of our exports fall into the natural resource category, whether we're talking about oil and gas or mining or agriculture, fisheries, forestry. And so I think we need to have a conversation where we change the channel from thinking of some of these industries as old-fashioned, outdated, unnecessary, to recognizing the huge role they play to supporting the Canadian standard of living, how innovative these industries are, how modern and how they work all the time to get cleaner and greener and safer. And we should be proud of our industries. And that's a theme that we really, I think, can come together around in the West.
Prabha, what's the reception been like for the council?
It's been extremely favorable. And if I may add, I mean, this is a unique beast because we have a chamber organization that has joined forces with business councils. And I don't think that model exists anywhere else in Canada. And I just want to thank my colleagues for including Saskatchewan Chamber. I've been very fortunate to work with these strong, stellar leaders. I think it's been really well received in Saskatchewan from our members. And in fact, we did not have a business council in Saskatchewan like the 3 entities in the other parts of Western Canada. So I think we stepped in to fill a gap, and it has been very well received, particularly this project.
So I know all of you care deeply about public policy. You're all public policy nerds on one level or another, and so I want to jump into the details of it. The coalition has put out its first public policy paper, the Untapped Potential initiative, which deals with unlocking Canada's natural resources, a variety of resources across the full West and a variety of sectors. Bram, what was the inspiration behind this work? Why begin with natural resources?
The need for nation building has never been stronger. And when you look at what we have in the West, unlocking our true potential, where our potential has always been, is in natural resources. So quite frankly, it was exceptionally easy to find that common ground of natural resources. And then when we kind of defined that across the 5 areas that we did, it was clear that we all had not only individual ideas as associations, but our membership all had not only a great knowledge of those industries, they were leading those industries, they knew the problems, they know the solutions. So it was really quite easy to put all that together and really to move forward and to give solutions, a real playbook for the government on what we need to do to unlock the economic growth potential of Canada and the West. So it's clear, I mean, from ag to aquaculture, we feed the world. For oil to gas, we move it and heat it. And then forestry builds it. And then, of course, critical mining, or critical minerals traditionally. And the new stuff is the emerging market and technology. So, I mean, what don't we have is probably a better question.
Now, when you say unlocking our natural resources potential, what do we mean by that? Adam, how far are we off from that goal today? And how does the next 10 years look like if we can actually accomplish it?
We're a country mile away from unlocking the true potential and capability of our natural resource sector. John Manley, a former deputy prime minister and cabinet minister under Prime Minister Chrétien, has often called natural resources Canada's family business. And unfortunately, for the past 10 years, we all suggest that the family business has been shoved in the closet and told not to show itself at the family parties. So, the unfortunate part is, if you look at the chart of accounts and you look at what drives tax revenues and productivity and incomes and frankly wealth in the country, it is largely driven by the natural resource sector. We are a country endowed with all of the things that Bram just mentioned, but we've faced 10 years of an ideology that Canada needs to play its part by focusing more on intellectual resources versus natural resources, but also that we know better than the rest of the world in terms of being able to share those resources and develop them and export them to the markets that are in need. And we've seen global leaders come to Canada asking for our resources and being turned away at the door. And so they go elsewhere. They sign multiple decade-long agreements with other countries. And so we've seen policy that's obstructed the development of our resources. We've seen regulatory and approval processes that drag them out so that no investment will ever come to realize the extraction of those resources and the creation of the infrastructure needed to export those resources. We've seen regulation masquerading as constructive policy for the climate that is curtailing investment and activity and ultimately production caps in our resource sector. We've seen hardworking farmers being strained by putting on burdensome fertilizer emission reduction policy proposals. And so the West wants to keep that we have, and we want to keep contributing to Canada's prosperity. And the ability for us to do that is through the natural resource sector, but we just have been constrained. And what does the future look like? If we could unlock that potential, if we could get policy right, if we could accept that Canada has a vital role to play in feeding, fueling, and resourcing the world, Canada would be back on the top of the list of economic growth for the G7. It would be on top of the list for income growth, for GDP, for prosperity, and we would just frankly be a place that was helping the world achieve its ambitions of providing healthy food, of reducing emissions through cleaner fuels, building sustainable products and projects, et cetera. So we're just asking, let the policy environment create the conditions that enable each province to play to their strengths and assets, and just look at the prosperity that will generate.
Well, that's a pretty stark analysis of what the last 10 years of policy direction has looked like. So why don't we get on to how we actually do that unlocking and talk through some of the prescriptions that you folks have put together in Untapped Potential. You know, one of the work was organized into some big picture strategic enablers and then some sector specific work. So why don't we talk about the big stuff first? And Laura, one of the major themes through this work, and that certainly we've heard lots about lately, is regulatory reform. So what are the top changes that the coalition would like to see in Canada's major project approval and regulatory process?
Yeah, so just before I want to get to that, I just wanted to jump in on Adam's comment, because I just want to underscore how serious the challenge is that we face as a country on the economic side of things. Our economy has been absolutely flatlining. Our growth has been just abysmally low. And just to give you one number to put that in perspective, we've seen the third weakest growth rates over the past 10 years of the 38 countries in the OECD. That is not anything to be proud of. And, Jack Mintz, well-known economist Jack Mintz, has talked about this. He talked about this at a recent conference, that we really need to leverage our resources to get out of the funk. I mean, we are really in a funk in Canada, and that's before the tariff crisis. So we really do have some work to do. But just quickly on the regulatory side, I mean, one of the things that is absolutely killing us in Canada is the slow maybe, the uncertainty around timelines and making decisions. And we just have to do better. And that does not have to come at the expense of high standards. We can have both high standards and low burden. But right now we have high standards and high burden. And that's not a winning formula for our country. And so we really have to find ways to do things faster, to simplify, to streamline, and to create as much certainty as we can, so that when a big project is thinking about, hey, is Canada our destination, or are we going to go to the US or another country? When they look at those factors, that it's a winning formula, and there's a proposition that people can nod their heads to. But increasingly, that uncertainty and that slow maybe is just creating too much uncertainty for people, and they're going elsewhere, and they're taking the jobs and the prosperity and the tax revenue and the higher wages with them. So that's what we have to really turn around. And regulation is a huge, important part of that equation.
The slow maybe. I love that. An American friend once said to me that maybe is the Canadian no. And that stayed with me ever since then. You know, we sort of say, oh, maybe we'll do that. Maybe we'll do that. Yeah, send us another report, spend a little more money, and maybe we'll think about making that happen. So I think the slow maybe and the fact that we just can't live with that is really well put. Prabha, I wanted to go to you to talk about trade enabling infrastructure. How important is that to realizing this vision? And from your perspective, where are some of the bottlenecks for, you know, as basically the province that's in the center of Canada, you're the furthest away from the trade. What do we need to do?
Yeah, and we are a landlocked province, and we're an export-driven province, like Canada is an export-driven country. I think Adam articulated this really well, the importance of our resource industry to Canada, and that sector being one of the key drivers of growth in our country. But that sector, the resource sector, cannot flourish if we don't strengthen our domestic transportation system in order to access some of the international markets. And we know that Canada has not invested in infrastructure in a very long time, 10 years and more. And the infrastructure we have right now is outdated. And some examples of that would be, you know, our limited pipeline capacity to transport oil and making us use alternative methods, the lack of investments into modernizing our ports, the recent labor disruptions, the port and rail disruptions truly has undermined Canada's credibility as a reliable training partner. I think what we're calling on the federal government to do is to develop a long-term strategy, a 25-year strategy to enhance export infrastructure. And I think this strategy really should focus on projects of national significance that'll expand access to international markets.
Pipelines. We need to get pipelines built so we can free up the rail infrastructure for ag products and manufactured products. And let's not forget, too, that Manitoba has access to tidewater for what it's worth. Churchill's there, and at some point, you know, it's going to come into play. I don't know when that is, but at some point, global warming is going to bring it in.
Let's talk about Indigenous consultation, something that I know that you care a lot about. You've called for a clearer, more effective Indigenous consultation process. What would an ideal approach look like?
Indigenous consultation is very near and dear to our heart, and it close across all of Western Canada. Unlike in the eastern part of Canada, Indigenous populations here make up a large percentage of our demographics. You know, Manitoba, we're approaching 20%, and they have traditional rights and authorities via treaties and modern treaties over wide swaths of land, really all the land that we're talking about. So that consultation it's not only, you know, necessitated by Section 35. I mean, it's important, and we need to move beyond that. When we look at truth and reconciliation, there were several calls to action that were put in place. And really what it means partnerships. It means from the very start of a project to the very end, when we're looking at the remediation of whatever that project was, we need to have Indigenous partnerships. And that means equity stakes as well. You know, Alberta's done some great work putting funds in place to allow First Nations in particular to invest in some of these projects. When there's ownership, there's economic opportunity. When you have that economic opportunity, you know, those are true partnerships. So I think that's really where we need to start. And we need to look at, you know, traditional knowledge and stewardship of the land, combine that with the modern techniques and technologies that we have now. You know, this isn't 1900s mining anymore or resource extraction. This is very, very different. And so if we do it all together with the purpose driven of we want to leave Earth the same way we found it, we actually want to make it better.
Across all the sectors, you've identified those areas, you know, efficient permitting process, trade enabling infrastructure, and Indigenous consultation. But this work also dove deep into 5 natural resource areas: energy, forestry, agriculture, critical minerals, and aquaculture. So, and each of you folks have specific expertise in a couple of those areas. So I want to dive into this a little bit deeper now. And why don't we begin with one that's certainly near and dear to my heart, energy. Adam, you have called for the repeal of investment killing policies for the energy industry. What are some of those policies, and what would you like to see instead?
I think it's important for folks that may not be familiar with the resource sector to sort of have the frame that, sometimes you can put in place policies that are meant to do certain strategic aims, and sometimes they can be a positive for the industry, sometimes they can be a negative. What I think you've seen, particularly in the energy side and to some degree the whole natural resource side, is this two things. One is just a layering upon layer of problematic policy that makes Canada such an unattractive place to invest and an uneconomic place to do the activity. That and additionally, that not only are some of the policies about the production and development of the resource, they're also about getting them out of Canada and into international markets. And so you sort of start to feel like, is government trying to tell us something here? And as you begin to see all of these layers and all of this sort of dual-pronged approach, it's very clear that they're really trying to curtail and eliminate the activity. And I think the poster child for that is the energy sector. Specifically, some of the problematic policies that we've seen are the old Bill C-69, which created the Impact Assessment Act, which was an attempt to try and, from that previous government, to streamline and improve the environmental assessment process. But what it has done has created a tremendous amount of uncertainty. It's layered with political interference. It is a cumbersome and unpredictable process, such that no investment will likely happen under that framework. So we would like to see that replaced with something more pragmatic. And if it's not going to be replaced, then it needs to be very, very significantly overhauled, particularly in light of the fact that the Supreme Court of Canada ruled it unconstitutional in many areas, and the amendments made by the federal government did not go far enough, in our opinion, to bring it up to a constitutional appropriateness. Part and parcel with that around the same time was what was called Bill C-48, which banned tankers off the West Coast, which was a very clear policy signal to make it impossible for us to export oil and natural gas off the West Coast through new development. And I should say that Bill C-69 was largely the framework around how the Northern Gateway, Enbridge Northern Gateway project was canceled, and C-48 was just sort of the nail in the coffin on that one as well. And then along came the oil and gas emissions cap, which, despite the protestations of the federal government, is a production cap, because there is no technological way and timeline viable to achieve that emissions cap. And so they would have to curtail production. So again, that is a restriction on the production of the actual resource. And then finally, one that I think is probably got the oil and gas sector in its crosshairs, but affects all of us, frankly, not even just the resource sector, but I think every company in Canada is the newer Bill C-69, the greenwashing provisions that the Competition Bureau has put in place as of June of last year, which basically muzzles and silences Canadian companies from being able to talk about ambition, including net zero, or any kind of improvement or innovation around environmental technologies or environmental performance, such that Canadian companies are going to be concerned with actually saving it. And the irony is that the federal government's Environment Department, Environment and Climate Change Canada, submitted to the Competition Bureau that their policy and framework and guidelines would curtail investment in emissions reduction technology. I find that absolutely the height of irony that Canada's Environment Department would push back on greenwashing provisions. There's a hot mess of policies constraining not only the production, extraction, but also the export of our oil and gas resources.
Yeah, it's stunning what you just described, and even worth highlighting a little bit that the government had put forward these so-called anti-greenwashing provisions, ostensibly for environmental benefits, and then the Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change Canada said, hey, we don't think these are a very good idea. In fact, we can't even hit our own goals if these stay in place. It just shows it's kind of the policy dissonance and disconnect. Let's shift gears to food, because nothing unites humans quite like food does. We all eat. Food comes from agriculture. And I think many Canadians aren't necessarily used to thinking about it this way because agriculture is such a big part of our economy, at least in the West. But there aren't that many countries on Earth that are net food exporters. There's like six last time I looked, or maybe seven, depending out of 200 countries on Earth, and a whole lot of that food in Canada. Canada's one of them, and a whole lot of that food comes from the West. So Prabha, what do you think it would take for Canada to really seize its destiny as an agricultural powerhouse?
Canada feeds the world in some ways because Canada is the largest producer and supplier of potash to the world. I mean, we've been supplying potash fertilizer to many countries across the world, and we have some of the largest crop plant in the world. Our producers engage in some of the most sustainable farming practices in the world. We are a significant producer of value-add food. We have in the last while engaged in innovation, ag tech, and this really positions Canada to be a key player in global food security. However, Canada has not seized the moment. Our federal government has not put in place policies that could leverage what we have here in Canada. We simply have not given enough prominence and influence to agriculture, and it ranks relatively low as an economic priority. I think it's really important for Canada to do a few things. It's important that the federal government signals publicly the importance of agriculture as a key priority and as part of its larger economic policies. We should elevate the role and the position of the Minister of Agriculture in cabinet. And again, that would send a signal about the importance of that portfolio. And I think to Adam's point earlier around regulations in the energy security, I think we need to make some assessments of new policies and regulations in light of what will be the impact of that on the agriculture sector.
There's one sector that's been talked about quite a lot, which is critical minerals. But I don't know if the production and ambition has kept up with the with the level of talk yet. Bram, I'm interested in your thoughts on that and how you think Canada could fast track critical minerals production and mining while still maintaining environmental standards and meeting community consultation responsibilities.
Our premier likes to joke that Manitoba is the Costco of critical minerals. Now, in light of everything that's going on with the US, I'll say it's the Canadian Tire of critical minerals.
Sure.
But as you know, when you go shopping, if goods aren't on the shelf, they're not much good to you. And with critical minerals across this country, a lot of them are still in the ground, and that's wildly problematic. And the world needs them today, not 2 decades from now when we may get an approval process. So to me, this is all about will, partnerships, and policy. And that's all 4 levels of government. So I'm including Indigenous government in that to move us forward and work together with the private sector. Laura mentioned something that was absolutely key to this whole process, which is that one single clear environmental and regulatory approval process with a reasonable timelines and a reasonable challenge function and resolution function to those who have issues with particular projects. And it has to include monitoring and reporting. It has to be clear and concise. If it's clear and concise, industry and proponents and opponents know exactly what to do, what the process is. It needs to be measured. It needs to have a clear, concise timeline to get that international and national investment that we need. If we do that, we'll get the market a lot quicker. And I think along with that, we need to invest now in the workforce that we need to run these projects because they're large, they're well-paying, they're going to be massive economic drivers to us. So again, you have an Indigenous population, you have a youth population that's looking for work, but needs to be, the governments, and this is provincial and federal governments, need to invest in a secondary school system and a post-secondary school system that's geared and directly linked to labor market outcomes. So they have to invest in where the jobs are. And this is where jobs are going to be is in these natural resource sectors. Mining specifically is going to be massive. And that can include some retraining or reskilling for existing workforce and some targeted immigration. So I think if we do all those things kind of collectively, we're going to have the workforce to meet it. But if we don't have that regulatory process clear and concise, we will not attract that investment. So there's issue number 1.
Yeah, well said. Laura, I'm going to make you do two for the price of one. There's two sectors that are sort of uniquely British Columbia within this discussion. They exist elsewhere, but they're special to BC, and those are forestry and aquaculture. So on the forestry side, what do we need to do to modernize regulation and get our forestry sector competitive? And then switching gears on aquaculture, it's one that kind of flies under the radar. What's holding that sector back right now?
I think a lot of the themes we've been talking about, I mean, they really do cut across all sectors. So Prabha mentioned, for example, championing the resource sector, championing agriculture. And I think that same can be said for oil and gas, same can be said for mining, agriculture. We've also all talked about the regulatory side of this. In the case of forestry, a lot of the regulations that forest companies deal with are provincial. But on the federal side, of course, there's things to do with migratory birds, there's things to do with species at risk. And there's a lot of regulations and permits that are outdated and really need to be modernized and looked at from that perspective of how do we have these high standards, but how do we do that at lowest possible burden. So kind of a minimum dose approach, like what's the minimum dose of regulation we need to get the kind of the outcomes that we want. So that covers forestry. Of course, forestry has struggled also with tariffs for longer than most, and that's something that will be very important, and that sector is watching even more closely, if that's possible, in some of the other sectors, because there's a fear about a doubling down on that. And when it comes to aquaculture, listen, it's a smaller sector, but it's incredibly important to some of the communities on Vancouver Island, for example. Indigenous partnerships are very strong in these communities with the companies, and they are providing high-paying jobs, which is true, again, across all the resource sectors. The jobs in these sectors are high-paying. We should be proud of these jobs. For that sector specifically, we do some really silly things, like we permit for 5 years. Well, what company wants to make a big investment when their permit is 5 years?
Right.
And we've also, in that sector in particular, I would say, taken a really unscientific approach. Like we've been, that sector has been subject to bans and it's just a lot of activism that is not scientific and not a balanced conversation. And I think they deserve better. We need to ground these conversations in good public policy and in good science. But yeah, I think across the board, we need to be championing these industries. We need to be proud of them. We need to get back to being proud of our resources and what they contribute to our economies, both at a local level and at a national level.
That was one of the things that really stood out, actually, in the report to me that you just mentioned was the importance of aquaculture to some, remote communities that otherwise have very little economic development opportunity, and the fact that we've been unscientific about how we've gone about regulating that just seems like completely rowing in the wrong direction.
Mm-hmm. And when you're small, sometimes you don't have the same voices to champion you. And so I know Adam's talked about some of the struggles with the oil and gas, which are very, very real. But imagine being kind of demonized as a sector and not having the same resources to fight back. And that's kind of where we are with aquaculture.
Let's look forward a little bit, and I'll ask you to talk about the future of the coalition as concisely as you possibly can, because I want to get to a lightning round of some of your ideas for the next 100 days. But we've got a new government in Canada now. We have Prime Minister Carney, who has been officially elected by Canadians, and the Liberal government returned. Adam, what's the coalition doing to engage with them?
Well, I'm very excited because at the end of May, we're recording this first week of May, but at the end of it, all four organizations are heading to Ottawa to do a joint advocacy trip to meet with Canada's new government, both on the ministerial side and the public service, the senior deputy minister ranks and others, really just to lay out the opportunity that Canada has to build off of the Prime Minister's ambition to be the strongest economy in the G7. Well, you cannot achieve that without a productive and robust natural resource sector. If he wants to build, baby, build, then we've got a host of amazing projects that can help to get our trade infrastructure, our resource infrastructure built, and again, help other countries around the world with everything from food, fuel, to generating prosperity here at home. So our aim is to lay out the case, talk about the importance of it, and dovetail it to their priorities and ambitions and goals that they've set for themselves in platforms, and just try and establish some common ground there, and paint the picture of the policy solutions that we put forward, which we think are pragmatic, and can enable them to achieve what they want to do and what we want to do, which is a thriving resource sector.
So energizing the Canadian economy, obviously one of the biggest issues on the minds of Canadians and our national government. There's another issue though as well, and this is the relationship with our largest trading partner and the frankly trade war that we have brewing with the United States at the moment. Bram, how is that interacting with the work of the coalition?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to remember, the U.S. may not be our best friend anymore, but they're still our friend. They're still important, and we're really talking about the work of a small group of people put these things in place. So, I'm not trying to make light of it. I'm just trying to say, we can control the way we react to this. And I think what it's really done for the coalition, the timeliness of it, it's really put the economy first again. For a while, I think we got lost in a lot of other things. Now we're talking economy first, and we really need to lessen our reliance, and it's a wake-up call to lessen our reliance on a single trading partner. It's laid bare the fact that our productivity, our trade infrastructure has lagged. We talked earlier about some stats and figures on that. And it's really, for me, not only do we have to invest in our competitiveness, we have to invest in our resilience, but it's highlighted the opportunity not only to extract those resources, but to look at processing those resources, and looking at supply chain manufacturing along the way to really kind of diversify what we do and to really take final products to market. So I think this is for the situation we are in. Not only are we helping government, we've literally built the roadmap, the way forward on this particular issue.
A bit of a lightning round and some good ideas and advice to government. We already talked a little bit about Canada's new government that's in place. You're going to be meeting with them soon. And so, I'll just open it up to whoever wants to jump in first. If the Prime Minister or his advisors are your next phone call and they say, what should we be doing first in the next 100 days? What are you saying back?
This is a defining moment for us as Canadians, and it's a defining moment for this government. I think one of the things we need to do is focus on our domestic economy. But in order to build our domestic economy, our Prime Minister needs to provide a clear signal to Western Canada that he and this government are ready to leverage what we have here in the West to build Canada as a whole.
Really, the new government has a tremendous challenge and opportunity in front of it. And it starts with, who do we want to be as a country? What is Canada's brand? And I think we've all been talking about today that natural resources should be, and pride in our natural resource sector should be an important part of that brand. And I think clarifying that would be tremendously beneficial.
Our premier likes to talk about the economic horse pulls the social cart. And what we need to do is we need to feed that horse. It's got a lot to pull. We've set up a lot as a society, whether it's healthcare, education, et cetera. So we need to feed that horse. Enabling policies that allow private sector investment. Again, this is about putting private sector capital to work. Clear policies that set goals and timelines so that we're not doing the maybe thing. We're doing the yes, if, or the no, because. I think that also includes getting rid of interprovincial trade barriers. Specifically, I'm thinking for this one, labor mobility. People have to be able to go quickly to where these projects are. They need to signal a clear intent and investment in productivity and competitiveness. And then we really need trade stability.
Adam, what are you saying to the Prime Minister and those around him?
Everything that my amazing colleagues have already said. And then I would say, work with each province and territory to identify what are some projects that they feel are important not only to their province or territory, but the national prosperity. Identify them as projects of national interest and commit to getting them done, approved, fast-tracked, and operational as quickly as possible. National interest projects that are done in concert, in partnership with the provinces and territories.
You know, it's really interesting when I put together what all of you just said there in terms of advice. These are things that don't cost the federal government hardly anything at all, and in many cases, nothing at all. And sure, there will be aspects of the policy recipe that need to involve some money, but it's neat how much when we're talking about natural resources can really be done just with these non-monetary tools as well. It really shows how we've been holding ourselves back. I'd just love to say thank you to all of you for doing this. Pretty cool to have so much business advocacy horsepower from all of Western Canada all on at once. Hard to schedule, but worth doing. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks to my
Thanks.
colleagues. It's been amazing working together.
This wasn't just a panel, it was a powerful show of regional unity with some of the best in the West. Laura, Prabha, Bram, and Adam represent a coalition that's ready to lead Canada's economic transformation. That's because Western Canada's business sectors are not the past, they're the future. Thank you for listening. Be sure to follow and share the podcast to help us keep the conversation moving forward.